Oh, this one's gonna be good. Exotic hardwood, jigs, chaos, near-death table saw moments, YouTube gold. Nice. Did you see that badass intro? I make a new one for every single video. So we're going to be working with some Purpleheart and some Jatoba. This is Jatoba right here. Got it on the flattening jig, and we're going to go ahead and run it through my planer. I'm telling you, if you're working with the twisted warped board, you ain't working with nothing but frustration. Once I get these flat on one side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the jig away and go ahead and put them through and flatten them on the other. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to resaw these so I have more pieces. Could I use the bandsaw for this? Yes, I could. Is my bandsaw blade dull? Yes, it is. Fact is, we all make choices. I made a bad one, bought a blade, dulled it out, didn't get a new one. My bad. Once I resaw them, I throw them right back into the planer to get them down to a thickness. But just know this, wood's gonna move. It lies to you, it's gonna move. So you have to let it sit after you do this for at least a day. I use the drum sander to get it down to final thickness. Man, are you guys seeing the grain on this wood? It's amazing. All right, what we're doing here is we're going to square up the pieces of wood. It's important to have straight lines. If not, you're going to have a cattywampus little box. Okay, it's time to measure and then cut to size. Funny thing, I had to make every single jig for every step of the process here. This little sled right here, I made it about 5 minutes ago. I'm going to cut each one of these boards down to the final size. I actually made enough for 2 boxes, but I'm only going to make one today. One of the reasons I haven't been in the shop is work, but the other one is it's been a total mess out there, disaster. I started getting it cleaned up, and I feel a lot better being out there. Now, I made this jig to do the miter joints, but it's not really meant for larger pieces. Watch this. The cutoff lands on the blade, and it shoots back into my hand. Keep watching. Now, if you're going to make a jig for larger pieces like this, go ahead and put the jig on the other side of the blade and keep it tilted that way. That's a better way to do it, and the piece will drop off of the blade instead of into the blade. I decided to put a chamfer on the box. I kind of jerry-rigged this router. You should see the clamping situation down below it. So, OSHA, if you're watching, who am I playing with? I'm not that important. OSHA doesn't watch my videos. But I don't suggest this, but it works, right? I go ahead and I put a smaller dado in this bottom part of the box and then a larger dado for the top, in the top of the box. If you watched a few videos back, I did something called the bourbon box. This is the cutoff from that slab. Kind of a rotted piece of pecan, but man, it has some great spalting in it. Look at how beautiful that is. Now that I've got this to a good thickness, what I'm going to do is cut it down to fit inside the dados before I glue up the box. You remember the old adage, measure twice, cut once. It never works for me. I have to end up measuring 18 million times. This piece right here was lopsided for some reason. I had to end up fixing it 3 times. For the bottom of the box, I had this leftover piece of walnut plywood from the bourbon box, and I thought that would be perfect. So I grabbed it, cut it down, and now it's time for sanding. The problem with sanding such small pieces is they start spinning around. It's impossible to hold. I'm over here sanding my fingertip. I actually cut my finger. You'll see a Band-Aid on there in just a few. Got to be a better way. I'm going to give you a pro tip. No, I'm not a pro, but I'll give you the tip anyways. The best way to do boxes is just like I do right here. Take those pieces, long end to long end, tape them on the back, put glue in the joints, slide the wood into the dados, and wrap it up like a burrito. Use tape on these small things. It's the best clamp you'll find. I'm not sure why I made this scene so long. I'll go ahead and speed it up for you. You get the gist of what I'm doing. Sounds in the next scenes is very satisfying. So I'm going to sit back, shut up, and let you listen. I know what you've been thinking, where the hell's the Purple Heart? Well, here it is. I'm going to resaw this down into thinner pieces, and then I've got special plans for it. Once I have them resawn, I go ahead and pull out my trusty glue mat, and we bring them down, and we're going to glue them together to make them a little bit wider. I know this doesn't make any sense, but the boards are now too wide, so I have to rip them down a little bit to get them to the height that I need. But don't worry, that piece is not going to go to waste. I go ahead and I sand it down and get it flat. Look how beautiful that is, seamless. Now it's time to cut down the Purple Heart to size using my little miter jig to cut all the miters along the sides. Then I cut another scrap piece of walnut plywood for the bottom, and we're ready for sanding. The last time I sanded small pieces, it was mayhem. I cut my finger, pieces were spinning around everywhere. But here's a little trick for you. Take some painter's tape, put it to a flat surface, put some painter's tape on the back of the small pieces, use some CA glue, put it down, they aren't going anywhere. And then go ahead and sand up to 320. After sanding, I found a small crack, and normally I'd use wood glue, but in this case I went ahead and hit it with super glue so I could get this done, hit it with some accelerator, boom, I was ready to go. Then, more tape, more glue, plywood panel in, we burrito this thing again. One thing I want to say here is don't be like Ken. Don't use so much glue. Man, it squeezes out, gets inside the boxes and the corners, then you have to scrape it out. So it's time to cut the lid from the box. We're going to do that on the table saw. Do this little scene right here. Thought this would be cool. Not as cool as I thought it'd be. But this is the most worrying part of the whole build here. You know, if you don't cut this off right and it collapses in the blade, you could really screw up the whole box. No worry, we get through it. After you cut the lid off, you're going to have some saw marks. It may not be completely perfectly even, but this is what I do to fix that. I take some sandpaper and tape it down to a piece of wood and sand it flat. Time to make some splines. I'm using another jig that I made just for this. What's the count? 4? I have to cut 12 splines out here. I feel cocky at this moment. And you know what? I was right. I nailed it. At this point, I feel like I'm the greatest spline maker that ever lived. Told you I wasn't going to waste that piece of Purpleheart we cut off at the table saw. Right here, I'm thinning it down to 1/8 inch. I go ahead and I cut these down into little pieces. These will go inside those spline cuts, and it'll make a very good contrasting wood for the Jatoba. So you remember that cockiness I was talking about earlier? This is where it all disintegrates, and I realize that I am the worst spline maker in the world. Another pro tip from a non-pro, don't use so much glue. Holy crap, it's hard to sand off. So I went out and bought this little Ace Hardware flush cut saw, and what a waste of money. It just wouldn't cut very well. Not because of the saw, but because of me. So I changed tactics, and I go ahead and use my oscillating tool, and man, it banged them out real quick. I know what everybody's thinking. Man, Ken, you're a genius, and you've done everything perfectly up to this point. But I haven't. What I realized is that I forgot to put the chamfer on the Purpleheart box before I put it together. So that's what I'm going to do here. And then I have to use a chisel, and it doesn't look as good as it would have if I would have used the router before I put it together. If you want to make fun of my chisel skills and my cheap Harbor Freight chisels, head on down to the comments. Let me know how bad I am at it, or how bad those chisels look. I don't care. Do what you got to do. I never knew that there was some sort of subset on YouTube that cared so much about chisels until I used one in one of my videos to open a can. Wow, the trolls came out. Remember when I was gluing in the splines and I told you I used too much glue? Well, future Ken here is really pissed off at past Ken because this was miserable. I decide I want to add some elegance to the Purpleheart box, so what I do is I start flocking it, but I use glue. I should have used black paint. The white glue shows through, so I have to do another coat. Learning experience against my will, I guess. Now is when I really screw up. It's got a good purple on the box, but I want something deeper and brighter, so I do something called flaming. In the end, this causes two issues. One, the wood is way too dark. Two, the glue in the miters come out, so there's a small gap in the miter joints now. I want everyone to know not to worry. I use these hinges just to put the holes in the box. I use different ones at the end, and they are not silver. All right, it's time to finish the box. I use Rubio Monocoat, and look at that grain. Holy. And I'm sorry, but wow. I just love Jatoba and that grain structure it has. When I first started this box, I really thought that pecan was going to be the star of the show. And I'll tell you what, it's certainly not. That Jatoba takes it all home. See how dark that Purple Heart is. That is not what I was going for. Not happy with this box at all. So we had a snowstorm and an ice storm come through South Carolina, and everything was delayed. So I finally got in. I think these are brushed bronze hinges, and I've got a clasp that really clasps this thing up, and I'm going to put that on too. Kind of do this kind of weird. I just drill a hole, put the clasp on, put the screw in, and then do the bottom part of the clasp. And with that, this build is in the books. I appreciate you guys watching. If you liked what you saw, hit that thumbs up button, share the video. Hey, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more of this. And until next video, stay cool. Guess it's time for some beauty shots. Check these out.